welcome to the Bryce Eddy Show. So today I'm going to have to apologize to our audience. We are setting up our new studio. We just moved things around here. And so we have a guest today who's gracious to be in this little temporary moment here. Dr. Mark Mayfield, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Bryce. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to have you on because, we're going to talk about your kind of recent area of expertise, and that is addiction when it comes to social media. And boy, is that going gnarly today. And I think we're all kind of fighting it. I've got 3 daughters, and we've done a really good job while they were growing up of, preventing as much as possible, screens in their hands and all of that. But now they're all emerging into adulthood. My oldest is 21. She just got married. My middle daughter is 20, and then my youngest is 16. And now they're entering the working world. They've got phones that they've got to be on for things, and it's just a constant kind of pull into that world. And then in the world that I'm in, I'm having to regularly interact with people on social media, promote the show, do all that stuff. And I mean, you get into doom scrolling really easy. These things are made to addict you. So, I'm hoping you got some answers, brother.
It's ever changing, right? So we're always trying to keep up on, and it's more about just the culture of how we view these things and kind of the boundaries we set up for ourselves, really. They're not going anywhere, right? I mean, it's just getting more and more complicated. They're not going anywhere at all, but trying to help families and parents set up structure and expectations, and we need a break from it at time to time.
Yeah, so let's talk about how you do that. So, for us, when my girls were young, they shared one phone, between the 3 of them, which created a little bit of accountability kind of naturally built in. They were given alternative things to be doing all the time. We had them in many activities and music and other things. And so it was helpful during that time, but that quickly goes away when you can control them that directly, or kind of deflect them from those things.
Yeah, it does. And I always tell parents, start young. I mean, obviously, when we're trying to dive in with teenagers that have come accustomed to a certain way of doing things, it can become quite difficult changing that mid-cycle, midstream, but it's not impossible. But, I think start young with your kids and figure out, what's best for your family and your culture. I always ask families, what is your culture of tech at home? And they'll look at me kind of cross-eyed going, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? It's how often do you let your kid on the iPad or the phone, or how much are they watching TV, or how much video games are they playing? Is the internet on all the time and accessible? Is Wi-Fi accessible and on all the time? Are you monitoring their stuff? And as you can imagine, most families look at me with deer in headlights going, I don't know how to answer those questions or even where to begin. And it becomes very, very overwhelming.
Yeah. I had someone that worked for me years ago who, their kind of go-to pacifier was a screen so that they could, go to dinner or, or be, quiet with one another and, kind of be undisturbed by their, baby at the time who, well, I think was, maybe less than 2 years old. And I, was just having a conversation, with her, and she was a, pretty determined, focused, successful person. And so, I wasn't really making any recommendations, but I said, oh, you got to be careful of that because, you're creating, pathways in this kid's mind. And, yeah, it's convenient, but here's what's happening. And so she ended up going, okay, yeah, you know what, I'm not going to do that anymore. And kind of just cold turkey took the phone away from the kid. And her describing the, the fit and the like, detox time that it took. And, she pushed through it. But I mean, we're talking about a 1.5 or a 2-year-old that was, sitting there on the screen. I mean, already, more proficient than most adults in navigating around this thing. and she described, I mean, legitimate withdrawal symptoms. I mean, it is it's hard to combat that. So what would you say to parents right now that are in the thralls of that, or have been just out of what they consider necessity giving their kids these things?
Well, yeah, I think it's conditioning, right? We're conditioning our kids to need it, and if we can condition our kids to be okay with being bored. Remember what that was like growing up, right?
Yeah.
Go figure it out. Go outside. Go play. Go do something. It's boredom creates an opportunity for resilience and for grit, but it also is the chief catalyst for creativity and imagination. And so, if we're
Hmm.
always giving our kid a device to fill the time, right? I think it was a Stanford professor. His name was Dr. Elias, some long last name, but he said that if we are accustomed now to tweets and sound bites, and so his fear was that if we are so accustomed to those things, we're not going to be able to sit with the nuanced conversations and discussions. And if we don't use it, so here's where I'm getting at. If we don't use it, we lose it. So the example you gave, the mom quickly realized that this kid had become dependent on it, and so when you take that away, it gives them an opportunity to rework some of those neural pathways as you described, and it creates an opportunity for a different response. But if we're always going to that quick satisfaction, which is what the addictive piece is, it's that dopamine drip, quick satisfaction, quick engagement. We're seeing people like our stuff or comment on it, our followers or whatever it is, it creates that dopamine drip that gives us a sense of calm and safety. And now we are basically, for all intents and purposes, creating an attachment bond to our device. And so when that's taken away, our systems, our bodies don't know what to do with it. So I always tell parents is early on, create time limits, create boundaries. Research really states that our brains cannot handle more than about 45 to 65 minutes of device time at a time. And so, set half-hour limits. When you're done, you're done, put it away. Uh, I don't think it's effective to remove it completely because we got to teach our kids how to be responsible with it when they leave the house and that kind of stuff. But helping them with boundaries, expectations, understanding the addictive natures of it, is really important.
Yeah. Now, how did you get to be looking at this? What is your bio and background, and
Mhm.
how did this come to you? And you
Yeah.
know, how'd you get involved trying to help us here?
Well, I mean, I've been doing counseling for the last 15 years. I was a pastor before that, and but really, probably since 2019, been really engaged in this loneliness epidemic that we've been dealing with. That was there before COVID, but I think the blinders were taken off because of COVID. That we're
Mhm.
just a lonely and disconnected generation, and even if we're most connected, with our devices. And so I started doing research, started doing writing, speaking around these topics, and recognizing that a lot of our mental health distress is linked to our loneliness and our disconnection. And the loneliness, I think, is the cycle of loneliness, I think, is exacerbated by overuse of screen time and social media, in my opinion.
So, okay, if it's exasperated by that, what do you think has been the real, kind of source of that in our culture, and what do we do to remedy that?
I really believe it is that push for independence, but it's also that push for a sense of belonging. And so when we don't have the ability to sit with complex topics and topics of differentiating opinions, um, and so we it creates that cavern of separation between us. What I find is when people are able to sit down and go, I don't agree with you, but I want to get to know your opinion. I want to get to know where your perspective. it creates a connection of going, okay, like I hear you, I hear that you see God differently, or you see politics differently, or you see this differently. But you're not ostracizing me. You're not kicking me to the curb. You're not, pulling out your pitchfork and your, torch and coming after me. We're sitting in real relationship, having real conversation, trying to really understand each other. Um, we don't get that opportunity on social media and screen time. It's just sound bites. It's talking behind a screen, saying whatever we want to. And so the way God designed us, that connective piece between us doesn't get turned on, doesn't get highlighted when we're doing it behind a screen. And so when we don't know how to have these conversations, we don't know how to sit in complexities and tensions with each other, to hear each other out, to respect the imago Dei in each of us. It creates this rift that starts out maybe as disconnection or isolation, but can lead to pervasive loneliness.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, we're creatures of fellowship, and you don't get fellowship, through a screen or through Zoom. As much as it's, nice to, have this conversation with you over technology. The depth and breadth of conversation when you're, staring eyeball to eyeball with somebody, or,
Right.
I have a clip on my social media from a podcast I did with Congressman Madison Cawthorn, and he talked about cigars, and the fact that the cigar can be the answer to disconnectedness, because you got to sit down, and it's take an hour to smoke a cigar with somebody and have
Yep.
conversation, and
Yeah.
all of that. We don't have enough of those things in our culture right now. Everybody's rapid, everybody's short form, everything. And, it certainly is exasperated by, social media and platforms like X, where I'm glad we're able to say what we need to say. But, people are so nasty and arrogant on that platform. And you can fall into that easy when, Dennis Prager talks about, instead of argument, seek clarity over agreement. And that comes from like truly going, okay, where are you coming from? All right, I understand what you're saying. I disagree with it, and here's why. And it's such a better thing. I've been pushing very hard to have people that I disagree with, on my show.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an issue with the left and their kind of mentality generally. They don't actually want to have long form, detailed conversation about their positions, because I believe they don't stand up to much scrutiny. But I think there is a big difference, in the values in that conservatives hold and left hold when it comes to interpersonal relationships. I don't have to hate you.
Mm-hmm.
I can disagree with you and, think your position is nuts, but I don't have to hate you. And I think they've got a little bit different philosophy there. But to all of that being said, is I had a guy on recently who, I think says some of the, dumbest positions in regards to Christianity. But we had a nice, fruitful discussion, and and I'm sure I would have, liked him in person, even
Mm-hmm.
as a fellow human being. I mean, I think he's dead wrong, but it was the temperature was much different than at what our online interactions looked like, and I
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yeah. No, and it's uh, the Gen Z, Gen Alpha. I think younger millennials. I think they're struggling, and I think they're struggling to figure out how to do this. And I've met enough to know that there's a remnant that really understand the use of cell phones and screen time and social media that is affecting this, and there's a large group that won't admit that.
Yeah.
And it makes me scratch my head a little bit, going, when we're spending, I think the average now is 10 to 12 hours some Gen Zers are spending on their devices or on a screen. Like, think about the strengthening of that neural pathway. It's going to be a super highway, of just reactivity. I mean, how many times, and I'm guilty of this too, and thinking about your own life, how often do we go reach for our phone when we're bored? Uh, you know,
Yeah, or if you don't have it, even when you're not bored, you almost feel this like funny little itch, like, oh, what's happening?
Yeah.
And I'm working on combating that myself by having some distinct times. And we've talked about that here as a family about having distinct times where we're all completely unconnected to a device so that we can be connected to each other. And it's and once you kind of push past that, like, well, wait, what if somebody needs me right now? What if there's an emergency? Once you kind of push past some of that irrational thinking, you kind of like relax into the relationship again, and
Hmm.
it's good. And we're working on setting more of those boundaries here in our household, and I think it's important.
Yeah, and that's I think where parents need to start is just kind of take a survey of are we okay with where things are at right now, and if not, what do we need to do? And so, um, I always walk people through kind of what is your family mission statement. I've got a step by step guide that I walk people through, just going like, who do we want to be? How do we want to be? What are our values internally? What are our values externally? And where does tech fit in on that? We tried something here at our house over Thanksgiving this last year. We did what we called a 90s week. Uh, and so our phones were anchored at one spot, like a home phone. We could only watch live TV. Remember that those days when
Mm,
watch live TV and you missed your show, you missed your show.
that's
But
right.
we found that our kids got along a lot better, and we did a lot more stuff outside. I mean, obviously here in Houston, we get perpetual summertime almost all year round, which is really nice. But so we were outside playing with remote control cars and throwing the frisbee and playing
Yeah.
baseball, and it just changed the rhythms. And so I challenge families to go just change up your rhythms. Get your kids to buy in on it, but change up your rhythms. And then after 3 or 4 days, have them evaluate. Hey, we didn't fight this the last 3 days, or we weren't distracted from each other. What did you feel like that? How do we integrate this? Maybe not just like this, but are there components that we want to integrate into our family's DNA moving forward? And when you get your kids buy-in like that, then it's something that the whole family can get around.
Yeah, well, I love it, and I think that's a good lesson for us all. How do we follow your work and what you're doing on the subject? What can we do to pay attention?
Yeah. Well, I think it's educating yourself on all these things. I think the best thing to do is pick up some of the new research. Dr. Jean Twenge has a great book called The iGen, um, and she's a big researcher out of the San Diego area on generational uh, developmental stages, and so she's got some good books on that. But you can also check out the American Association of Christian Counselors, where I work. We have a ton of great resources at our educational side of things. Um, my newest book is the Loneliness Workbook, Hope and Healing series, a guide for flourishing, and it's a book, workbook on loneliness that I actually encourage churches and small groups to go through together. And it's basically finding out, what has led you to this point, and then what are the barriers, and how do you get out of it. And so when you're doing it by yourself, it kind of defeats the purpose, in my opinion. So getting a bunch
Yeah,
of friends together and going through it, you could probably do it in 6 8 weeks as a small group. But it creates accountability, it creates movement. I would also say for families to look at axis.org, axis.org, and sign up for the Culture Translator free email newsletter. And these are my friends out of Colorado Springs that do all the legwork for you on teen culture, and we'll send you a newsletter every week going, okay, here's the newest slang, here's the newest things that are trending, here's what you need to know, here's how you talk to your kids about it. But they've got a lot of free guides on social media screen time, on what to know about the pitfalls, what to be aware of when it comes to this, that, and the other thing. And so this is a great free resource that you can use and download from there as well. And people could also check me out at my website too, drmayfield.com, if they're interested. But our biggest thing is how do we get these tools in the hands of people, everyday people, without having to go to counseling. I mean, counseling is great. I'm a counselor. I think it's fantastic, but there's so much information that could be transmitted to families without the need of going to counseling. And I think this is one of those conversations.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, before we get to a crisis point, let's figure out what are
Mhm.
some of these foundational things that are affecting
Yeah.
us and going wrong. And I do think that, the addictive nature of these devices and just the way that, from social media to entertainment swallows you up and distracts you from the things that matter most. I
Yeah.
think, spending time addressing those things first and, see what changes in your life, before you go to the doctor, clean up your diet and,
Hmm.
start to see what the result of some of those little moves that we know would be good for us. What is that going to do? And what are the effects there?
Well,
These things are
yeah,
tools.
and I tell parents
Yeah.
all the time. I said that research has shown that the overuse of screen time has a correlative effect on depression and anxiety. And
Hmm.
so instead of going and putting your kid on medication, which I'm not against, by the way, but maybe we, like you said, clean up your diet. Maybe we adjust some things first. Maybe we spend some more time connecting with our kids. Maybe we put our phones down for a while. Maybe we do. And if it's still lingering, okay, then go look and get some professional help. But some of those things get cleared up on their own.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great advice. Say your website again.
drmayfield.com.
All right. And the
And
book.
then the book is Hope and Healing, a series. It's a guide for flourishing in loneliness. And you can find that at AACC, American Association of Christian Counselors.net, AACC.net. We have a whole workbook series. This is just one of them. We've got some on grief, depression, disordered eating, a lot of great resources for people to go through that are struggling.
Well, awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on. This has been great. It's something that's important. I apologize again for not being in our studio and doing it this way, but I think it's such a valuable conversation to have that I didn't want to push it off. So I appreciate you coming on, and with that, to God be the glory, and we are out.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thank you for watching or listening to this show. If you are someone who listens to us on the podcast apps, please go to our Rumble channel. Even if you're not going to watch us there, we'd appreciate you hitting subscribe. We want to boost those numbers up and make sure that that channel continues to grow. But again, thank you so much for listening to us.